All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Friday. Uh, Good morning. Hey. My inner child and my literal child are playing Mario Kart World today. It's really fun. It's a good game. Been having a blast. So, kind of go through the motions, I guess, this morning first, just to see what's going on. Because apparently there was a good jobs report. I could have looked. I didn't look for it, but you can kind of tell when the market's popping off like that something was good. Um, Overall, I'm not really sold on this move just yet. Everybody's got their opinion about it, and I'm not gonna put anyone's opinion down or anything. I felt like the sell-off yesterday was incomplete. So I actually wasn't, like yesterday and the day before even. I really wasn't looking for like a big move today. I think I would have preferred a calmer Friday and then like a big Monday. Most of and we said this last time. This is a generality, right? This is not an everything kind of thing, but I say that most of the stuff that I was watching, especially if it's part of the two major indices that we were kind of looking at, whether that's the Russell 2000 or the S&P 500, and those subcategories obviously are there, like the Russell 3 and you can do the S&P 400 or whatever. Point is that a lot of that was in lockstep, and there was a consistency of we're approaching levels that would be considered breakout levels, but everything had to make a decision. It was kind of like a decision time. Excuse me. So over the last couple of days, since maybe about Monday, Tuesday this week, everything had come into a place where you were sort of approaching like a new creek or an outstanding creek, some resistance, some critical level. And then Monday into Tuesday, you did get a little bit of pop throughout some tickers in the market. Obviously, some others didn't do as well. We can talk about Tesla today if you want. But Monday and Tuesday were largely positive for the most part. The setups are the setups. So if it's upside, just because it's upside and it's moving up with the market, didn't mean that, for example, like on Tesla, that this wasn't like a problematic hook. This was already kind of in the books, in my opinion. I didn't expect it to go as low as it did. I didn't expect Tesla to have a kind of this nosedive all of a sudden, especially with all the stuff that came out with the social media feud. It's nice gossipy drama, I guess, for the Wall Street elite to talk about, and how that impacted the stock, I think is pretty obvious. But it was set up kind of in a bearish way. So it had already tried to breach the top and failed, and then it was coming back to the middle and had developed a sort of a hook, an LSPY. So certainly, like, not everything is equal in that Monday, Tuesday pop did not mean the same thing for everything out there. But I would have said that afterwards, I would have suggested that Wednesday through Friday in its entirety could have been downside. And so I'm a little bit surprised to see both the S&P 500 and IWM kind of popping off this morning the way that they did, even though, yeah, like this is actually what I had on my chart. This wasn't particularly expected by me. Like I would have said Monday and Tuesday next week. And again, I don't know. Maybe this is just too much of a universal statement. I don't really know if they came low enough. I can see on the S&P 500, it came down all the way to that creek and the curve that I have on the chart. It looks nice. So this looks deep enough. But when I go to like individual tickers, I feel that it's a mixed bag. I haven't found, like for a lot of these that I'm looking at, I didn't really see anything that to me looked like that had to be the bottom. Like there's my Apple here. This had some really weird, nasty distributive action. Kept making lower lows and doing these up thrusts, and it failed really far. But if you look at like where does the creek backup go to, I mean, there's not really a way to fudge it. Like that's kind of the highest I can make that creek right there, and it didn't come hit it. So, you know, I would have expected 200, for example, on Apple. That's fine, but like even further than that, I would have said like 195 or, well, at least 198. There's just a lot of little things like that where it's like it didn't quite come low enough. So you might say, well, that's just a bear trap. It was like overextended or something. I don't know. You know, I read charts. I try to read them as literally as I can, like not interpret every little thing, but to like in favor of my bias is what I mean. But really just to look at it like this is what it is. Like it's a textual reading of it. It's a very straightforward reading of it. This to me looks distributive. Like it popped up high. It did not close, for example, on Apple above 205. It didn't close even above 203.80. It didn't close above that top. And then it came back down. So this does not read to me as a SOS. It reads like a distributive action. So then it's weird to see it kind of go down low, but then come all the way back up again, as if it's some kind of like a massive LSPY hook kind of thing. So then that leads the question, like, is that a change of character, or was this just like misread on my part? Is this a distributive top, but really like it's just selling off in order to go down in a bear trap? I don't know. You know, like it gets to this point of you're on a hamster wheel and you kind of come back to the same answer every time until you see something different. So I feel the same way about a lot of these tickers. We had talked about the market being in a potential like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mode, where this is like a 1, 2, 3, and we're doing a 4. And this is a weekly chart for AMD, for example, and I don't have any markings on it. And it makes sense then that 3 is corrective. So or 4 is corrective. So if you look at like a 1 here, and then this is like a 2 and then a 3, then 4 is usually corrective, which to me would indicate when somebody says corrective, I don't think it's just like a deep retracement. I think about it like it broke through the outstanding trend, and it did. And I think in this case it did drop through it, but then like it just doesn't go lower, which is weird and a little bit unusual. So this is a bit backwards because early this week when we were talking about stuff, it really felt like next Monday, Tuesday, meaning like the 9th and through the 11th, that kind of area, that would be the higher pushes. And I'm not seeing that correction follow through. So would I have preferred it come down again? Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I actually would have preferred that instead of popping up too far here, you know, that it actually went ahead and came back down and made like a spring and then took off Monday, Tuesday. That would have been a little bit healthier, I think. So instead, we're getting this kind of weird halfway kind of build out. You can see on the RSI, it's starting to do that curve thing that we really don't like, which is typically more distributive, where it's kind of arching upward. To me, it just looks like it's probable that it's going to come back and maybe try to create what I would call a hook. So I'm thinking that that's probably what's happening, and that's going to be the end of it. We've talked about this previously a couple different ways, and I don't know everything about every single ticker and what's going to happen, but like typically on the wave 4, if it's fairly like benign, you usually end up with a very similar motion here. So that would imply like maybe 140. that made a lot of sense and I talked about this previously. That made a lot of sense for AMD, and there's a huge amount of, I think, evidence that is indeed a target. It doesn't necessarily have to hit like next week, but it is a target, and I think by the bulls, and it's a good one. It's a clear target, you know. So in theory, could it be a push as soon as next week to kind of get up above here and just kind of drive it all the way home? Yeah, but if it does do this, I think it would be on some pretty extreme weakness, you know. And I don't like that it didn't, I actually don't like that it didn't come down again. That's just me. I think it's a weak looking move. And in some ways, looking at this, it just looks wrong. Like it looks like it's missing so much. I, again, would have preferred that this come down. So maybe we will. I don't know. Maybe it's going to be a turnaround Tuesday kind of moment where Monday's down and then Tuesday's back up again, you know. And some tickers haven't breached their top. So like AMD hasn't breached its top. Obviously Tesla went way, way low. Apple was kind of one that in that basket that we've been looking at that did go high, but it's also not breaching a top. It's really just going above the, right here. It's going above that creek again. So it's like a double up thrust right here through that creek. The second motion, even though it did breach the 203.70 top, didn't actually breach that creek, but this did. So this leaves like a big gap below, somewhat of a missed retracement, you know, and I feel like it's the same on some of these tickers. Like everything's a little bit off, and it just feels a little wrong to me. So what we may see again is we may end up seeing something. I don't know for sure, but we're going to find out next week. We may see like a pullback to sort of retest, if it is above, to retest the levels below for support, while some of these guys need to come down low and make a spring, for example, or make a real good dip back into liquidity. And we might see that reflect on the bigger ETFs with more of a subdued pullback, right? And then a recapture perhaps on Tuesday. It's a little different than I would have expected. I really thought we needed to have a little bit more downside, but it is what it is. And you know, the market moves the way the market moves. You can't always control exactly how things break out or move. Again, it's a mixed bag. So this is not a universal thing. I think some of these, like I'm looking at FANG right here, same deal. It's got this gap, and I could easily see, all right, it made an advancement. That's great. It came over the top. Sure. But it would be easy enough to see that even if this did change direction here, it could come back down and find a low in a backup, right? And just have that as a reversal pattern. So I wouldn't say buckle up yet. I would just say, you know, all right, we are where we are, and it's going to depend on each different circumstance. But I'm certainly seeing a possibility that bears are going to be at least the carrots there for bears to take it back down again and kind of sink the market maybe going into next week if there's nothing else new with the news. So everything looks like it could be in a position of, I mean, frankly, it's all make or break. So, I mean, you're in a position where if you break, it's going to drop pretty far, I think, for a lot of tickers. We're looking at some substantial potential downside. And again, that's a dangling carrot. Doesn't mean it has to be taken, but it's definitely there. I think in most cases, it's there. So with AMC and GME, I've been watching them pretty carefully. So for GME, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. This is obviously a weekly time frame. And I've talked about how on the weekly time frame, we were talking about like the idea of iterative motion and all this stuff. We're not going to go deep diving into any of that stuff today on a Friday, but we are going to talk about just some basic stuff like retracement levels. Because while GME does have a move and a break here, ultimately the retracement isn't, again, necessarily done yet. I think it's kind of like what we were just talking about on some other tickers. It's like there's certainly room for downside. You can't sort of rule it out yet. This to me is interesting, this kind of big drawback. I always think about cause and effect in the market and how there's often these reactions to certain actions. So anytime I see kind of a width being drawn, especially in the case of GME here, I have to kind of consider that as a possibility. So I've been looking at the possibility of this coming back down for quite some time, and I wasn't sold on it, so I said, it really doesn't make a huge difference to me. But previously I had said that I thought that I'm probably on a different chart. This could come as low as like 26. And then when you look at the big picture, obviously there's that ice level that got busted. That's pretty low. That's really this pocket down here at like 25.40 going into August. So if you were just being hyper conservative and you didn't think this had any more upside, I think you could be very reasonable in saying that if you think this is an SOS, which it doesn't have to be, but if you think this is an SOS and you were like, oh, it's an SOS, it could have a backup that lasts for a really long time into August. You're kind of counting on catalyst events to lead to something else. And I think the big one being, of course, the Tuesday earnings. But that's really it. I mean, that's like kind of the last straw right there. So if that doesn't propel it upwards from a technical standpoint, there's nothing else here. And I know that I'm kind of mixing the two, but I'm saying from a technical standpoint, I don't really see a need outside of just that extension upward that we have found on some of the time frames. But the S curve itself here was finished at 35. And I've said that, I think, without any kind of hesitation repeatedly, because it is what it is. It's exactly done. And anything else would be kind of extra. And there is that sense in which, yes, if certain things happen here, I definitely think it could try and push up even that high. But again, just a very straightforward reading of this chart. You could look at this and suggest that this doesn't go anywhere until August. It would be very easy to say that and have some kind of a support basis for it. Another reason why we think GME might be a bit bullish is because we're watching AMC, and AMC has the possibility here of making some advancements. I mentioned this on Wednesday. I took the day off yesterday to play Switch 2 with my son and hang out. And I did look at the market, but I wasn't going to stream. I did mention this about AMC. You have to make 2 consecutive moves here, not just one. So the first one happened the day of. It was on Wednesday. It pushed up above 340. Great. And it backs up, makes a lower low. So far, so good, right? Yeah, but what's not happened, right? And then where is this distribution taking place? Where does this wick take place? It kind of goes without saying, but you can't have one without the other. So a shallow S-curve has to have the dip, has to have that big sell down, which it did here. Then it also has to have that kind of V-shaped recovery immediately following it with that bounce out. You can have a backup after you make an advancement. That's fine. But the advancement has to take place. It just does. No matter how you cook this is not advanced yet. So, yes, we got the micro advancement right here at 340. That was stage 1. That needed to happen, and it happened. But now we're running into this problem where you have kind of a widening going on right here, and you weren't able, there's no buyers just yet. This is not heavy volume or anything. It's just kind of light push-up volume. There's this widening top now, on the short time frame, of course. This isn't a huge time frame. But this is problematic. You can't ignore this. And the fact that it did not make a higher push isn't a good thing. Well, it's still going to go or something. People will always say whatever they want to have happen. I get it. But at this point, there's no silver lining here just yet. This is all we have. And that's it. So what's the problem then, Booksy? You're not sounding super optimistic here. Well, the problem is it didn't even breach this high. I mean, if you look backwards at across here at the drop down level, it got to the drop down level, but didn't make an advancement. And the high here was 356. So that's a problem because we didn't even get over that. We got to 354. That's not exactly strength. It's saying that there's, at least for now, right? We'll see what happens here. If this can find some support and continue on. And I'm not looking at any indicators right now. I'm just looking at price action. So indicators may show that there is some kind of divergence here, good or bad, and that we may see some continuation, or maybe that we're just not far enough. Who knows? I'm not looking at that right now. I'm just looking at price. And all I can say right now is like, yeah, it hasn't made an advancement. So there's an issue of confirmation that hasn't happened. There's two markers that are being hit here that should not be ignored. So number one, it pushed up slightly above 350. It went up to 354. And if you look backwards at this red line that we've got coming down, this is a really important cross. If you're going to distribute at this particular level, at this particular zone, this is where you're going to do it. We've talked about this before, but there's a kind of a double whammy here of two crosses. And when I say crosses, I'm talking about like waveform setup crosses. So on a cross, what you're doing is you're coming down and you're defining like a support and a resistance. And you can see the same thing here, support, resistance. Okay. The reason I call it a cross is because it literally cuts through the middle of a wave. Okay. And that means that typically if this is confined to that wave, that's going to be the top. Like that's the most typical interpretation of it. So anytime I refer to it, what's called a cross, there's a bullish option there, but it has to be sort of overcome. Like the bearish option has to be proven to be wrong, because until it is, it's typically the most common option. So what I mean to say is that you can't take for granted that it's going to jump it. It just is not reasonable to do so. This is basic sine wave mathematics. This is not complicated. So this is a cross, right? At some point, this probably had some kind of a support region. And so it may have looked like what we call like an ice or something, right? Usually in the middle, it has one final hit as a support, and then it turns into resistance. This ends up being the most important level looking forward. Doesn't always have the support, by the way, when it comes down, but sometimes it does. Okay, so that when we see that, it's often like where we see the cat ears form, for example, is you'll see something like this, right? And there'll be weaknesses and junk, and then it'll go down. Okay, this ends up being the most important level when you come back, because most typically this indicates where you end up hitting a top, because it's already been defined as a resistance. So even more so important here is that we actually have like multiple of these. We've got one that's clearly evident, I'm literally drawing the chart again here, but like we've got one that's like very, very evidently, and they're really both targeting this 352 area. Well, that doesn't seem very good, does it? No, it doesn't. So where's the hope coming from then, Booksy, that this even has a chance to recover? Well, so just like this has this kind of generalized rule that is often, let me be frank here. It's more often than not, like by a large margin, more often than not, it is the top area. Okay. However, there are times where this still is breached, and it's not always necessarily the peak. So sometimes you hit that peak early, which might be the case right now, and you might even come back underneath it before it's all said and done and do like a cat ear and drop. So it's not necessarily that that's the top, the highest point. It's really just that resistance level. Other times, you cross this in sort of a similar way, but you might do a double top here where the second peak is the highest. These are less common, but they do happen. And they've happened in the market where this ends up being kind of the middle of a wave. And usually if that's the case, the middle of a top wave, if that's the case, you end up with some kind of a downward trajectory here that also matches like the center. It's like a pivot point essentially. And that ends up defining like the downward motion towards the bottom of the next wave. Makes sense? So what's going on in this top that might lead you to think that that could happen? This is where I pay attention to what I call like a microwave, which is not the same thing you put your pizza into when you want to reheat it. We're talking about a waveform that is generating here, right, where you've got a clear and evident cross down. It's even matching perhaps a previous one. And then you're looking at a localized jump of a creek. And ultimately, when we talk about creeks, we're talking about two things. We're talking about the main outstanding creek, which is usually a downward motion if we're bullish. If you're bearish, it might be an upward motion because you're kind of flipping the chart. So this would be this, I'm going to make it blue. This would be like your downward motion creek, right? That's the resistance coming down. But then also this ice level. And the ice level would be best defined as this level coming up, right? I'm going to make this one, I don't know. Let's just make it white or something. Oh, I had to pick a different color here. All the colors look the same. We'll make it purple. All right, so these are both technically ice levels, but they're also crosses because they're macro crosses, like they're big picture wave crosses. All right, and they've generated now a resistance / possible support. So one thing that often does happen is if you want to get back to this top, this can happen this way. This becomes like a triangulation for a potential SOS. And if this were to go back above in like, let's say that shallow S-curve model, you would break back out here, you'd have a higher high, and then you'd come up into like an SOS, and you would do whatever you're going to do. And then, yeah, potentially you're dropping off the face of the earth if this is distributive, which happens quite a bit on AMC, right? This is how you get that second push, and it can lead you to a distribution that's higher and way over the top. So in order for this to occur, you have to have that jump. You have to have that reversal. If it doesn't happen, and this is a very linear way of looking at it, because again, this is very sideways, but I think this is a good way to look at it. If this doesn't happen at the top, then there's no reason to think that this initial one, especially given our circumstance where we've looked at this and we've said, especially on like GME, for example, and even here that, yeah, I mean, this S-curve's done. And then you look at the upside and you're like, well, that S-curve's done, you know, and this one's done. And we've got like 3 different iterations that are basically finished at 405, which I've said frequently, like 405 was the main one. If you can hit that level, $4.05, you're going to be pretty good, you know, if you were to sell there. And you may have a buyback in, but you may not because you don't really know. You just don't. Well, you know, you've said 460 or whatever is a really good number and that this could be another iteration to the upside, and there's a number of reasons for that. Yes, I have. But that's me looking at the chart saying, how does this move forward? And you can see that this double whammy, I don't think it's a coincidence then that this is where we're stopping right now. If you look at where that crosses, it really is right at 353. We're on the intersection right now. And also, remember, even though this went really low, technically this was just a signal of weakness, which we did kind of get. We got that drop low. And ultimately, I had it stopping right here on that intersection. Like, this isn't new information. I'm just repeating the same thing. But, like, that's where it would stop. So you have to remember, like, this isn't me, like, saying, uh-oh, I forgot about this. This is me saying, this is all kind of the same. You have this problem area right here, and you do not want to get stuck underneath it. And especially if this doesn't make another high, this could still be in the middle of like a bigger S-curve. Like, I've still got this on the chart. It's valid until it isn't. Because the idea of it going down to 299 or 3 or even like lower than that, that area, that's still on the chart because it's technically like not made that turnaround yet. So this is not considered a shallow S-curve just yet. It's just not. So if you look at where that is, jumping above this and hitting like 362 would make this a higher high, right? We can do another diagram if you want. And then landing on top of this level right here gives you support on both of those crosses. That's a huge bullish signal. That in and of itself would give you, I think, a really big buy-in. Like being on top of these again with a strength. It's not coming out of nowhere. You know, people will say it comes out of nowhere or something because they don't think that the TA matters. It does matter. And this is a really important marker right here. This is a critical resistance point for bulls and bears. So making that advancement is not negotiable. It's not well, yeah, duh, it's going to do that if it goes up. No, like that's confirmation. So you have to see that advancement over 362. You have to see it back up then and hold above that 354 area. And if it does that, right, then I think that you're in really good shape. So what's the problem then with today so far? Okay, it's not done yet. We don't know what we don't know. What's the problem today so far then? The problem today so far is that we made the 340 advance. Like I said, it's kind of widening here, which is odd. It looks kind of weak as a result. There's not really a lot of volume in it. It did jump this creek coming down, which are like cat ears. Seemed to back up on it, weirdly gapped away from it, which I don't like because it left a gap there at like 341 or something. Yeah, 341. This is kind of a strange, spot because for me, I'm like, well, there's other things going on here that I don't really want to see this drop again. And it did jump, like we said, that in that sign of weakness right here, it did jump that ice. This is a local ice. It did break through it. And we talked about how when it did this previously, it did have a run up. So it's not all bad. It jumped up above that ice level. It held it 1, 2, 3 times. That's a triple hit on that ice level right there. That's the rising red trend that I'm kind of pointing to on the chart. Again, that's not bad. I don't think that's a bad sign. That's a good sign. But then it gapped in a weird spot because if it were to come back and fill that gap, it's going to break down from that ice. I don't really want to see that. If it does that early, it could double dip, but that's really dangerous. Like if this comes back down, especially if it makes a lower low or something, I'm really not going to be able to say anything except it looks bearish. Like I'll have to just kind of concede that it looks bearish if it does that. I mean, I've seen it do like a double dip below a ice before when it's doing an M cross. So this could be the case here where you like jump over and you may dip here and then you dip on the other side. But we'd still be in the same problem. Like you'd still then be saying the exact same thing. It has to get over this 353 area. Doesn't change anything. It just makes it worse in my opinion. And we'd have to wait. Maybe the volume would show us something else. I can't see what hasn't happened yet. So maybe the volume would show you something else. But on the whole, it just needs to make this advancement. It's that simple. So if we get a backup today or Monday, for example, we're going to have to watch it pretty carefully. And I think by Tuesday, and I know it's that after hours move for GME, but I think by Tuesday, you really want to see it already have built. Like I'm okay with this happening over here. I don't really care. I just think that you really need to see that built out in order to have any kind of resemblance of a confirmation of this move. Because until then, again, this is really a problematic thing. You got a double wick, or you got this wick that goes up doubly through both of those crosses. They're right there coming into a head, right? Going into Tuesday. I can't tell you how stressful that is because that's a big, big pivot point. In a good and a bad way. If you're like me, you kind of like seeing the movement. This is kind of really boring. Something's going to happen there, right? I'm almost 100% positive that something pretty pivotal will happen there because I think it's a pivot point. I think it's going to happen. Usually those intersections are there for a reason. It could be that's sort of a middle, but I don't think it's likely. The only thing that I can see here is that up and down, and that's already established by this cat ear. This cat ear is already doing what you would expect it to do. There's the jump. It's going into that pivot. It's like timed out. right here. This is wave 1, wave 2. So you need to see that jump up. And remember, wave 2, which is the second cat ear as we call it, could be part of a larger cat ear, so on and so forth. But wave 2 is typically like a 4-hit kind of motion. So you'll get like an M top that on that wave 2 that's a little bit flatter and needs to make the jump. Okay, so that means that there's another kind of a double M shape on the second one. That right there, the way I'm drawing it, this is kind of bearish, right? You might also see it do a bit more of a rise, which is possible. That would be like this. And then it jumps up and over the top. This usually is the bullish example of the same thing. This one typically comes back down pretty far. And it could be a little bit more downward even on this part too. Sometimes you have that advancement and then it actually comes down low into a spring. But the advancement's the key. We don't have that yet. So there's a problem right now in that all we have is like a weakness, so to speak. We're pressing down. And that leads to like this other scenario of like, well, if you just have downward motion here and this just kind of chops and then has a head fake again, or like a double up thrust over here, that's not bullish. Like that's a very typical kind of bearish cat ear pattern. And I would expect there to be a drop here that's essentially equivalent to the first drop, roughly. And that leads you back down to near $3, like 303. And again, is this surprising at all? No, because we already dropped this ice and then the next one up is the white line, which is right where we'd probably go if this comes down. So there's nothing new under the sun here. It's exactly as you would expect it to be with this drop here if it drops for that S-curve. So I'm leaving this on the chart. It didn't happen this quickly, but like it's the same principle. It really is. It's no different. It's just happening slower right here on the sideways. So it's very, very, very imperative. Well, that's all great, but that doesn't give me the answer, Booksy. No, it doesn't. But I could tell you this. I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to do, and you can decide what you're going to do. If this comes up above 362 and holds support over 354, I'm really bullish on it. I think it's going to pop at least to 290 and then possibly go all the way up in a kind of a squeeze motion up to 461. And I'm thinking that's probably where it's going to be. And I think that's going to be like this guy, very similar, where there's some kind of a massive leg up all of a sudden, and then it's going to run probably with a gap or something, and then it's going to run higher. And then that's going to be the end of it for me. But if between now and then we don't see anything like that, we don't see an advancement over 362 area, 360 area, especially that region right there, and we see some kind of weakness here, I'm not going to be able to hold, it's like I can't, there's nothing I can do to guarantee it. So it's essentially bearish until it isn't. So you just kind of have to, that's me. I would assume that it's going to go down until, and I could be wrong, but that's fine. Like I can't trade what I don't know, or what I don't have confidence in. So I think that would be something that to me would be like, yeah, I don't like that, so I'm not going to trade it. I would just kind of keep my hedge positions and leave it at that. Oh, you were going to miss out. That's always the thing, isn't it? And I don't know. The way these things move, sometimes, yes, the operators at times have faked people out by making it look really bearish, and then it's suddenly bullish. But it's so rare. Most of the time what happens if this is bearish is that it'll come down and it'll show again that weakness by losing the ice. It'll be underneath it. So now you have this chance that you're going to hook, and it won't ultimately make the advancement over like 359 or something. It'll pump up the last minute on Tuesday, it'll pump up to 356 and everybody will think it's going to run. And you might get some kind of a pop in extended hours, but that's exactly the way it typically ends with the distributions. They get the buy-in, the FOMO. Well, then what if it's just a bear trap? It's a bear trap that looks like a bull trap. That's actually a bear trap. Again, it's like you can keep going. It's a bluff on a double bluff. Obviously, it could be a lot of things, and we could say, oh, it's a trap, but what are you going to do, It's like it's not about whether it is or it isn't. It's like, what are you going to do? What are you individually going to do about it? Because you either trade it or you don't. And so you have to make a decision on your own account of whether or not and I just personally have seen that so many times on AMC. And yes, there are some very few times where when it does this kind of weird thing at the end of the day, it is bullish. But most of the time, it ends in kind of a whimper, sort of like this, where it make an advancement, and then it just sort of stays high. It stays above, it closes above at the top. That, to me, is a potential bullish breakout. That's different than like a wick, up, or just like a one-shot up that just sort of ends the day on that upside. That more often than not, by far, margins like 80-20, maybe even 90-10. More often than not, that's bearish. So like that hasn't happened yet. I'm just saying this would be very typical for our operator to do. Very, very typical. To sort of like keep it chopping here and then drive it back up last minute. So this should give you a pretty decent framework for the next 3 days for AMC. And then GME, it's kind of the same ideas. There's a little bit of an attempt here, I think, to try to generate a spring. I like this motion. So far, so good. I haven't seen anything particularly bearish just yet. Like, I don't think this came too high. So this resistance right here came lower. That's fine. There's an auto reaction and then another top. Really not seeing anything on GME that looks particularly bad. So I'm just telling you this. This is like me, again, flipping the coin saying, well, right now, I'm not seeing anything particularly bad. Some people would say that it came too high or something here, that this looks distributive. I don't think it came too high, personally, because I would look at the drop ledge and say that that's more important than that support region. That preliminary support coming down looks like an LSPY, right? But it was trying to like stop the advance here. So right now I'm just looking at this like, yeah, I mean, all we've got is essentially like an auto reaction and a phase B top, and then this looks like a push up into a spring. So you might even suggest that this is the phase B bottom, because usually there's like a creek that's jumped here, and there was. It's a weird looking move, but it's there. That's the typical advancement before it tries to nosedive, and then it did, and it went low. They left a gap, which again, I don't really like. What would normally take place is that you would hit like a spring, you'd come back up, and before you jump this creek, or as you're jumping it, you'd come back down and sort of land on top of it. So we're not there yet. Maybe we're going to get to that today. Let's see if we can figure out where that might be. Yeah. So typically you're going to come up and try this advancement, and if you can do it, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you can do it, you might even go as high as the next creek up, which is in our case very, very high up there. It's very far. Yeah, I think it might even go back to here. No, that's a little too much. Just use these two. That's pretty darn far. I don't think it's going to do that, but it almost doesn't matter. I'll just say that. Because at the end of the day, you know where those resistances are, and you know that they have to be kind of breached at some point. So there's not really a whole lot to be controversial about here. It's fairly straightforward. It looks like this is going to end up being the same as this double wick right here. Subtract the distribution from it. You see those two resistances. So it looks very much the same. So this is clearly like a level of resistance right here coming down. I bet even on this direction it is. Yeah. So this looks like a bunch of willy-nilly lines, but I'm really just trying to define like where is that resistance, and it looks fairly simple in this case. Most of that resistance is taking place in this pocket right here. So this area is going to be the main region that you're going to have probably some run in right there. And then another spot that you could use is the SOS zone. But I think that the SOS zone, the way I understand this and the way I look at this is that this is probably more or less pinpointing an SOS top, this resistance area. So from the peak, right, and I have to make sure this is correct, 3015. I want to make sure it's actually 3015. This to me would be like the SOS zone. Like that's where it's going to break out. This is a little different though. This is something I would try to triangulate. So this is where I get to that place where I look at where is the dominant uptrend. There's a couple. This one that started originally looks pretty good, and it has the drop ledge right here. That one looks pretty good. That might be a good one to use. There's another one that's a bit steeper that could help triangulate it even more. Seems like it might even be quite on the nose. So I'm going to go to like closing value. Yeah, it's pretty close. It's way up here at like 31. That maybe not my favorite, but that one could be used as well. It's like no different. It's the same marker. Right there. I don't think of these so much as like they have to hit there, more that that's like a point of interest. That's Tuesday the 17th. And that's up here at 31. Not very high. But interesting. And then I would look at this and say, well, ultimately, this is a great place to have a breakout then if it's going to break out. Because this is earnings right here on the 10th. Oh, oops. That's why it wasn't showing up. Right there, this little pocket. So at this place, I'd probably say that the most likely spot that you're going to have some kind of an SOS is probably right here, which makes sense. It is earnings. So what happens between now and then? I'm not 100% sure, but I usually would say, yeah, you need to come back and make support. It did hit this 29.36, but because it left a gap, certainly like if this were to find some resistance here after pushing up, it's not the end of the world. You can have downside and come all the way back down, maybe even going into Tuesday. And that could just be like a creek retest. Again, it looks very sideways and kind of blasé, you know, like ugh. But it ultimately matters because if this comes down and holds the support, then it's strong, right? And then you can break again going into Tuesday, so on and so forth. And you probably have some other kind of creek built out this way at that point if that happens. This is just an estimation, does not have to do this exactly. It could stop here and go down and retest and then jump. That'd be even better. The point is you're watching these levels and you're being careful about like understanding like this is where it needs to go in order to break out. This to me would make sense, and then have maybe even a gap up or something potentially on Wednesday, and then SOS, right? And then you could go, you know. Everything else here, obviously speculative. We're just looking at timing or whatever. But that's how I would see it. If I'm misreading this completely, then if I'm misreading it completely, then it's, I'm probably, where would I be wrong? It'd probably be here, that this was some kind of distributive action, or here, that this is actually not the spring yet. There's two places. So one would be like, well, if it's a distribution, you're reading this wrong. Then you're probably going to see it come back down and check the major creek body, which is really low. We've already talked about that. And that's like coming back down to fill the gap around 28, maybe even head as low as 26. It's going to be a breakdown of some other things. We can obviously go back and look at this and suggest that that seems pretty relevant as well. Like the fact that it broke here, and then it came back and already broke down through it. Yeah. And I think that this is holding on to that should not be neglected. You know, this gives you another sense of like, all right, there could be an important stop zone right there that might matter later on, yada, yada, yada. But ultimately, like we're talking about creeks down, we'd be talking about coming back this direction, probably back down to find the supports right here, which is pretty low. That's like a head and shoulder type motion, right? So if we're reading it wrong, that's certainly a possibility. And I could keep going, right? And suggest, well, if I'm reading it wrong, then actually that looks pretty good. The way that we have that spring where that is, that looks really nice. That's pretty clean. I would take that and turn it into a head and shoulder kind of marker. And then probably take this to where I think that shoulder is. I mean, it's really low. Maybe the better one would be to do this guy. Just do a parallel. It's not that far down. So the other option is that this could be like a spring action with where this is kind of shouldering up. It certainly looks like it based on the head, but I don't know about the shoulder yet. And that shoulder is really weak. Let's see if that's a parallel. Yeah, it's parallel. So again, that also kind of intersects this zone right here, which is quite interesting. But certainly if this is like a fake out and this ends up not, or this is, excuse me, not a spring, this ends up being the phase B bottom, you could dive below that. So one thing I would probably watch out for in this case is if it suddenly advanced really high, I think I'd be a little nervous that it might come all the way back down through here. If it goes too far above that zone and doesn't check it, that it could come all the way back. Because usually if it does that, that means that they're jumping it because they don't want to check it and they're going to use it. And that would be a way to get down to like a spring body in a similar time frame. Same ideas from there forward, but that certainly is a possibility as well. So you got a really nasty drop there that goes too far. We'll do this a different color. Or goes too high and then distributes. I think it could mean it's coming back down low. And then we'd have to kind of wait and we'd have to see this break back above multiple levels. I'm sure it would work all the same if it were to be bullish, but you'd have like a deeper dive. What about the S-curve? Well, this is the shallow S-curve. This is not a full S-curve. You know, a full S-curve doesn't make an advancement here, and then it also doesn't make an advancement here. So it's essentially a failure on two fronts, just like on AMC. It would fail to make an advancement, then fail again. And probably at that point, this would look like a big fat hook instead. And you'd come back down. It's that simple. It's almost no different than what we see here. It's almost exactly the same. In terms of like what's needing to happen, like these are certain creek jumps that need to happen, backups and creek jumps that need to happen. These are certain backups and creek jumps that need to happen. And so likewise, you'd see that follow through. I would not go so far as to say it could not be a combination of these things, but I think at this point, this is actually pretty straightforward. Yeah. Because at some point, you're going to have to make a decision at this top, you know, which is right up here around 31, these creeks, whether or not you're going to go back and check the bottom again, whether you're going to make a quote-unquote spring. If we got this wrong and this is not the spring with the phase B bottom crossover, it looks like it is to me because it's kind of small. But if I'm wrong, that's probably where I'm wrong. So we'll keep that in mind. Same thing here. I think you'd have kind of have to make the argument this is already a spring and it's going back up. So That's it. It's a pretty straightforward couple of days, actually. This is sort of the most important section. And yes, like AMC, there is a possibility of this upward motion on GME that could be quite strong. And you might say, well, you have this parallel here, and it looks like if it drops, it's just going to be like horrible, like coming down really low. Maybe, the 26th area is not, in my opinion, it's not really a negotiation. It's more of just, when does that happen? If it doesn't happen now, maybe it happens later, and it's a strong likelihood that it happens later. It's this area right here, which is like the liquid center. It is indeed the middle of that. So if it happens now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. So I'm just saying, this doesn't mean a lot. This means nothing in some ways. You could be right at earnings and it comes down to like 27 and then pushes down a little lower and then breaks out, and then it could go. But if, for example, and I'm starting to really like this trend, I'm starting to think this might be a pretty important marker here. It looks really similar to the other parallel. That's fascinating. I'm looking right here and I'm like, oh yeah, that was from like way back. That's really interesting right there. Anyways, so I'm looking at this as if this is definitely the thing. And again, it's like dropping doesn't necessarily mean you couldn't go back up. So I think there's a sense in which just be mindful that like there could be a similar sort of a symmetry here. This comes really far back down after that advancement and it comes back up to this marker. I think you could see something kind of like that. Actually, let's extend this the other way. Yeah, that's right where it needs to be, isn't it? That's bizarre. Well, that makes it easy, I guess. So what you're saying is once this hits that, it's going to go up to the top. I mean, you okay? You gonna ice it? You're trying to use mouse mode? Oh, you bumped your elbow. Hey, if you want, instead of being on the floor there, use the sketchbook. And you can sit with the sketchbook on your lap. Do this. Just shake it off, buddy. So, I don't know. Really, either interpretation could be correct. I guess what I'm trying to say. You could interpret this as like, that's where the spring is. I mean, it does look correct now that I'm pointing it right here. It's like, oh yeah, look, it's going to drop right there and hit that marker and then take off. That's very symmetrical. I mean, that's cool. I like that. I don't know that was, that's the plan. I guess that's a weird thing to say. Symmetry is funny like that. It does have these motions that sometimes work. But 61. But like, I don't know. How do you go from there? I have no idea. Don't know why I would do that. It's kind of slow too. I don't know. Let's see if this is playing out in any kind of symmetry. Usually, the symmetry is more about this than it is about this, but I guess we can try it. So this is 61 degrees, 61 degrees. So this was definitely like a V shape. Oh, now I've got it wrong. So this is 46. I changed the angle. Oops. 46. It's probably going to end up being this trend. So this goes kind of hyperbolic away from it, and then drops down through it in a really dramatic fashion. Yeah, like a perfect 50-50 cross down of that trend. It's like flawless. So it goes away from it. It's a slingshot. It goes away from it too far and pulls back down through that trend. But how do you do that to the upside? I don't know. Kind of have to make sure the scale is right. I suppose it's all about this guy, isn't it? It is. It's all about that guy. This is a big creek retest right here. So this is almost like a, if you look at it inverted, this is like a cat ear. So you've got a really deep low, bounces out. Then you've got the paw. You've got ear 1 and then an ear 2, which makes sense. We've already talked about this as like cat ears and junk. I think that this then would have to be looked at as a cat ear down. Let's get rid of some of this noise. It's pretty noisy. Okay. So this looks like an upthrust cat ear right here. That is the walk down through the ear.
Need help.
Okay, just a minute. I'll come over. What do you need help with?
Something.
Okay. Just a moment. You might be farther than me, so I don't know what it is just yet. Okay. This is starting to make more sense now that it's upside down. I told you guys, I'm getting so used to looking at downside now. Yep. So this looks like like upside down land. This actually looks kind of bad for bears because it looks like a sell off right here. That's a huge buy-in. This just looks like an upthrust. And it is weirdly symmetrical to the opposite side, like almost like a head and shoulder. That's so bizarre. Isn't it? That's really weird. Check that out. See that motion? And then look at the motion on the opposite side. That's freaky. Like mechanical looking. But notice that it pushed up above this creek and then twice, and it failed to quote unquote advance. So this would be bears. Bears would have wanted this to hold and then drive it back up. Instead, it goes all the way the other way. So if this were an SOS, which is unlikely, because it didn't even come above this top, it looks bad for bears. I mean, you can say that, well, Symmetry could keep going indefinitely or whatever, but at this point, I might even look outward further and say that if it's still symmetrical, we might be in this kind of a motion because, and I'm not going to say it's definitely symmetrical, but you can see this motion here. There's the 1, 2, and then 3, 4, but you see that one's high, that one's lower. Then it comes down, and there's a middle zone. Same thing, 1, 2, but this one's lower, 3, 4. Yeah, this would look like a reversal if it came to 26 at first. But it really could just be a creek check, which is fine. Like I said, that doesn't mean it couldn't go again, is what I was trying to say, and I think that's true. This may actually need to drop there if it's got too many sellers. And then the next action would be a pretty mongo huge move here. I don't know if I like the idea of this being symmetrical forever, but this would be a pretty significant move if it was symmetrical. Be way high. Timing, there's not really any way to tell. Like that's August, so there it is. That's the creek right there. It was already an August move assumption, so I guess that's that. All right. Well, that just kind of reinforces an August move. It doesn't say anything about this one. It's kind of slow, if that's the case. It does make you think it's going to just kind of go. That's weird. This is too early. You would have thought this would be like the pointed side. Now I'm curious about something. What if, what if we're right and it is going to go, but it doesn't get to the actual creek test there. Instead, it only goes up to like 40. Because this timing indicates that this is, I'm coming, buddy. I'll be right there. This is a, I didn't forget. This indicates that this is where it should hit like a low, but it's actually, if you look at it proportionally, this is like June 27th. It's kind of a weird day. And then there's an implication here. I'm kind of surprised that we found this the way we did. But this is actually the top. It is. Look at that middle. This is a really clean like cat ear structure, but it's upside down. Yeah, look, it's right there. It's like hanging on it right now. This is great. So it almost doesn't matter what happens because if it leaves this point right here at 30, 31, it's going to be bullish. I think it's going to move down to, hey, where are you going? I'm about to come over. Where are you going? Where are you going? Why'd you ask for help and then walk away? I just said a minute ago I was about to stop and pause and help, but I had to come to a stopping point. You can't wait like another 30 seconds?
No, I just knew
Okay. Well, I can help you later then, since it's off. Okay. Sorry. All right. Well, dad fail, I guess. It seems probable that if it does need to go low, that it comes back to 26, which is indeed that middle marker for both the ice and the creek. But then, in addition to that, which is kind of a confusing statement because what we're basically saying is that there's essentially a big cross here, which is going to amplify itself in just a second. But you'd also have, if this is the case, you'd have this kind of walk back up, but then you'd really rock it very quickly. You go back to, you'd have to be back there around June 27th, which is almost backwards. I think what I said before is like the rest of June would be quite crappy. But it's like backwards because in this case, if this is symmetrical, that's where it hits. There's two lines of thinking here. One is that it has to come back up and make the hook, in which case it probably comes back to fill the gap at 28 and then distributes up top above 28. that does make some sense, you know, that it might need to come back here and distribute. And it also gives you a symmetry on a certain level of this reaction and this reaction. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't adhere to this main kind of principled trend that's being created in this upside down land. In which case, it really shouldn't go any further down because it's already exactly where it should be right here. This doesn't go any further down this way. It doesn't go back way up here. I mean, it's just retracement levels. So at the end of the day, again, does it really matter? No. But I think we're on the right path then. This is very much a reinforcement of what we were just talking about, that if it needs the spring, you could still have a push up to near 28, or excuse me, down to near 2860, which again goes near that gap fill. But it also may be that that's already done and you don't really need it. And I think that's reasonable as all get out. This particular trend is exactly where it needs to be, right here. So the only other thing that's kind of questionable, I suppose, is like, where is that middle? Timing wise, I'm not 100% sure if you want to measure from the bottom or measure from here. There's two different ways to kind of go about it, because I usually try to measure from the breakout point. Which is like on January 13th. This is good stuff. You could also measure from there. So this is a little off. I need to be a little bit more precise. I was kind of eyeballing it. So one is July 2nd. I bet the next one's like the July 11th. Oh, it is. It's July 11th. Of course it is. Everything's July 11th. July 11th is the tariff deadline thing. So this was built out around the 11th. That seems highly likely. So we're going to go with that. So that would imply this is popping and then, yeah. So really what we're saying is that this drives the price up until the 11th. And that's kind of interesting for a number of reasons. I don't know. You might suggest that you could get overly complicated and say like, well, that's the 11th or whatever. But I think that what we're looking at is really just this overall picture of downside. This is like a S-curve down. So what we need to do, again, kind of ignoring the distance here. This distance is different. It's almost like that instead. We need to kind of ignore this, the distance, the fact that this traveled so quickly and this did not. How sure are we about that trend, Booksy? We're pretty sure about it. I'm pretty sure about it. I mean, there's certainly like levels of, probably like fib levels. It's like a fib channel or something. That's like the middle. Right there. We're kind of stuck in the middle right now. Yeah. So this motion has kind of a 1, 2, 3. Like I said, if you want to get really specific about it, we could go into stuff like that and suggest that this shakes out going down. So it goes up and then comes all the way back and then goes all the way back up again. But if we're just doing the measurement from bottom to bottom, realistically, that's not even happened yet. So it's Monday the 14th. Yeah, which is after Friday the 11th. I don't know, man. I'm trying to make it precise, but it is what it is. It's kind of like right there on the nose. It's on the cusp of Monday the 14th, but it's also like on Friday the 11th, depending on probably on time frame, how you measure it. It's like both days. So from a symmetry standpoint, there should be some kind of a drive back down to this level potentially. And that would make sense. This is like an SOS backup breakout. But what? But we just don't know if it goes higher here. And it totally could. It's not really a big deal if it does. So what we want to know rather is this is the first S curve. The first S curve that we did measure, we said that's the end of that S curve, and it is. But there should be another S curve then that goes out to the 14th. I recognize that this is going to get kind of dicey on the chart for a minute. I will try my best to smooth it out, but I'm going to just go ahead and do this right now. That's the second S curve. That's good news if you're a GME holder. The only other issue is that on the 11th, it's actually not all the way down here at like 43. Again, the question mark of like how far does it go is a big question, but we're just talking about this marker. You could have it advance this mark. This could be an advancement of the trend, just like this was. Oh, well, that would make sense. So if this is a spring, that measure should end up being the same as the extension on the top, which happens in a trend in a spring like that. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay. That's the right thing then. So that actually is enough. That gives you like the loaded move right there. So it's farther than it should be, but that's also because it came below the bottom of the channel, so it can extend above the top. So it's $43 around the 14th. So now what? Well, we don't need the symmetry anymore. I'll keep that. This one, this is probably where it's going. I said that a minute ago, and I wasn't really sure how to draw it, but I'm going to try to do it correctly now. Because there's a series of parallels coming down right here that seem really relevant. And I think this already existed back here. As you can see, that's the creek cross. So I messed it up a minute ago. Totally goes all the way back to, yep, this tiny little trend established in April 2024. That's crazy. That was before the move even happened. It reminds me of that AMC chart in that way. So the question that I have is, does this go all the way to that breakout? I think it does. So it hits the top there, definitely hits the top here, like 4 times. It wicks right there. So this is now like a widening out motion that's trying to get back to this. This doesn't necessarily get there, which implies that I think it does so later. Like it's not done yet. We talk about these cross-ups on waveforms, and they don't seem maybe always to be, well, I don't know. They're always relevant. You know, I think that's where I'm trying to get at. It's like they're always super relevant. If if it came back this low, I would be tempted to say it's done the backup and it doesn't necessarily need to go any higher, just from the standpoint of where we're at. And we're talking about GME right here. If you don't know and you're watching, this is an upside down chart, so it may be a little bit confusing, but. And I'm not using my typical iteration model. I'm just doing waveform analysis right now. So I'm watching that waveform and trying to see where that marker is. And we've got parallels running this direction that are symmetrical. So we've got symmetry working on either side, and it builds out to the 14th to bring you back to near 43, which is essentially like a full cycle. But what's interesting is that that's not actually a full cycle because it's a cycle back to July 24th. The next motion potentially would be this build out here. You can see why that seems a little bit backwards because it feels like, well, shouldn't we already be there? We're resisting. But I'm going to just say it. I think this is the nature of like an offset move. And I don't necessarily think, and this is where things get kind of dicey. I don't necessarily think that the way I have it drawn out is how it happens. And it's really more about the idea of it being offset is part of the importance of it. So by the time you got down to here, if you were trying to say that like, all right, Booksy, you're trying to say it comes down to like 39 or whatever, at least, maybe up as high as 43 on July 11th. But right now we're already in this kind of middle, so why wouldn't we be going further than that? Because I'm literally just doing the timing. And I think that because it's offset, it looks a little wonky, but I actually think that's probably a good thing. Because then the next one up, if you go to continue to look at those lows, the next one up would be over here in August. That makes perfect sense because August is the breakout zone anyways that we've been talking about. So even in like a really basic understanding and reading of this, August looks really good. And then coming backwards even further, this is probably going to be closer to September, and it's like right on the button. I don't know if I did that on purpose or what. Maybe I had this already. That's like September 11th area and the 12th. That's like right on the nose. It really is. So, yeah, and then look at these. Look at this wave up and wave down. I'm totally just splitting the difference between like the actual, like this dotted line and this other one. I'm just splitting the difference between like the middles. So if you cut through the middle here, it's probably going to point like right to that intersection. And that's the ultimate like target, is this creek jump and then backs way, way, way up. That doesn't surprise me. This is a very, very simple wave cross and drop back down. So it's like going to be like a big S curve if it does it like this. Let's get as close as we can to where that is. Yeah, I can't really tell for sure, but it looks like these three marks right here we're attempting to sort of better define right there. Better define it, but it does kind of cut through the middle here, so I don't know. You got to pick one or the other. This doesn't abide by this, and then this here doesn't abide by that, so I think they may have been better defining it here, so I'm going to go with this one. Yeah, that's 70 to 80 bucks. 70 is actually already higher than the previous top if you ignore the after hours move. So even if it only came up to 71.90, that's still higher than which is what this is showing. That's just hitting the creek, nothing else, right? That's all I'm saying there. It just hits the creek, nothing else. That's actually already higher than the top, so that's probable. And it looks like, and then look at that offset here. It's the same offset. It's like they're trying to generate that momentum. All right, so let's say, for example, let's say we hit 40. We may or may not make this offset. Maybe it happens now, maybe it happens later. But let's say you hit 40 here. We have a pretty decent cause for that already. We've talked about that previously. This is looking really good. But for this motion, it doesn't mean that long term it couldn't be distributive or anything like that. We've talked about those options. I told you guys I didn't like the idea of going to 17 now because it causes all kinds of issues. I think it causes a lot of issues going forward. But with the expansion, this makes more sense, and you can still come back to 17 later. So just keep in mind that, like, just because I'm saying it goes up high does not mean that it has to keep going indefinitely. But if you were to look at that and suggest that, well, that's it, it's done, I think I would be okay with that because technically it's done the drop and then it waved over and hit this. And that's sort of like an inverted, it's like an inverted spring of kinds. Because at that point, and we're not quite there yet, but I think, I don't know what this is. What is that marker? Sorry, I'm in the upside down chart. It's kind of confusing. Oh, that goes way back. Yeah, dude, if this thing went to 17 right now, I don't know. It doesn't look impossible, but it feels like it would do it over here to me. Because you see that motion? That's the big creek. Like the biggest one we have right there. That's the one that comes from the all-time low through this low here. And notice that, like, this is all like a compression below it. If you flip the chart upside down, it looks like that typical M where you're like jumping a creek and then coming back to check it. It totally looks correct to me from that vantage point. I'm running out of colors, so I'm just going to use like orange or something. I don't know. So this is the local creek, the orange one. And we're getting messy too as we go. But this would be the motion down to hit that creek. But then it hits a new high, which if you flip the chart upside down is, again, kind of like a low in this case, because the way we're looking at it, like the upside down land. Which is fine. It comes below the floor and upside down land. It looks like the middle of 2 years to me when you look at it upside down, because it's not coming all the way to the all-time high, which again in upside down land looks lower, but it's like 86, 85. It sort of stays raised. So it teases it out like you're going to get there, but you may not get there. And that's where we get kind of some dicey stuff, because if it hits here, there's not really any precedence to go any higher. I mean, there just isn't. You could make the argument that it will, but it's like you have to then have like a reason. And there's no creeks to be hit. It would guess it would just be like a real spring. Maybe this is the precedence for it, you know? Oh, wow. Look at that. Look at that parallel. What? Okay. I see you, parallel. This might be the January, February move, in theory. So this is some kind of like mad, huge retracement. This is the one that goes back to the, I see it now. So in this model, this actually is the one that goes back to check the actual creek. And it is a massive distribution of sorts, because it would need to come back above. This sort of makes sense too, because they just generated like a new cross right here. So this is like a macro cross now down to the bottom, or the new top rather, which would be like 70. And then you'd have like a big 618 to 786 retracement to come back. And then you'd rock it again in January. Awkwardly. Like, everything is happening faster than you would think it would happen. Because people were talking about like June slash January, you're thinking it's like 6 months increments. But in this case, it's not 6 month increments. Actually, that looks like the end of that. What the heck? How's that possible, Booksy? You just did this on the small scale. There's no way that's the same value. Oh, well, that's because that is the big scale value. So what was the next one? That's here. Oh, bother. This is weird. I'm going to use this as timing. I'm going to just go ahead and just do it. And I'm going to just assume that this is the right timing. I'm going to change my chart a little bit as a result. But then this is like the reaction here. And then in August, you get a big buy-in move. I'm not saying AMC is the reason for that. I'm just saying that's where it is, and it is where it is. So I'm not going to argue about it. This is really just like a big macro creek cross down. So this has to be like a second ear. So basically like ear one, deep dive, ear two. So from a waves perspective, what I'm saying is that this is all connected right here. And this is basically like a second ear down like this. It's all one. The reaction here is a bit odd though, because it's a little off, but it's basically like doing some kind of massive push up almost immediately. The best thing we could do is kind of divide it in half again and suggest that that's roughly where the low is. Roughly. Which is correct. We got it in the right spot. Which is interesting because this was made earlier. But then this one would be somewhere like here, as opposed to being that low. So roughly in the right spot timing wise. And then you'd be going all the way up into August 20th, which is again really freaky similar to AMC's timing. And maybe it's based on GME's timing, right? Maybe it's based on some kind of a overall outlook for some of these that are still grouped together. But that's very high. That brings you up to $60 in August. It's different than what would be expected. And then it actually goes all the way back. This is a huge dump. This would go all the way back to test the top here, which is really far. So if it goes low early, I don't think it does that. I think it just goes beyond. But I think if it doesn't go low early, there is a case for it. It's pretty easy to make case actually for that move. Yeah. So there would be a jump right here. This is going to end up being like an inverted kind of cat ear marker, like a wave that fails. For the bears, it's a wave failure for bears to advance, okay? And it will be like this kind of an arc down, but for us it'll be up, right? It'll be a good thing. So the first S-curve finishes here in July 11th. Then it backs up. There's some kind of sell-off that happens. Then around mid-August or early August, it turns around weirdly again. timing wise, that's where it is. And then this is really, really, really far. I think at this point, I'm kind of reaching, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know that that makes any sense that you would go that far back. Probably will depend somewhat on like moving averages and stuff. Like our moving average right now is right on that pocket that we think could be like the high end retracement, which is actually low end, I'm sorry, which is like 2670. It's hard to say. By the time this comes down here, or up here rather, to 40, since we're upside down, it may not be that far. It may only need to be like right there, you know. So we may get that right here, even in that retracement. That's why it doesn't go down all the way. My guess is that's exactly what we're going to see, is that here, when you get to this top, I don't want to say that I'm 100% on this, but my anticipation would be that your moving average will at this point be right here, which is right in the middle of these two potential targets. And that's probably why you'd get a sell-off if it dropped here. Plus, it's where that creek is. So everything is going to connect right there at that point in time. Your moving average and everything will be there. And then that would give you like a big bump if you jumped above it, like a 50-50 up, or rather down, I guess. Keep talking about this upside down land. And then if you don't, I think this is just a rejection off of that new, because it's there now, that new creek. So it makes perfect sense. So that's everything's in the right place for this to happen. But then the melt up is kind of strange because it doesn't seem timing wise to be quite right. So it gives you a sense that it wouldn't necessarily go all the way. And I just said a minute ago, I thought it could go to like 70, but the way this intersected originally is a bit different. So I don't know. It would still be possible that it could go that far, but I'm not going to do that right now. Let me see. This is the parallel as well, and that was strangely accurate as well. Like it's really clean. That's right here. So I would say between August 16th and September 12th, it's going to hit that $68 to $70 area. $64 up to $71. It looks like August 18th is like kind of the earliest date, and then September. That's not really that big of a jump. It might seem like, that's a whole month, Booksy. Yeah, but the only thing I don't really understand right yet is what happens here. This backup is humongous. I'm thinking that it's not going to be that big. It's not going to be perfectly symmetrical. Technically, these aren't either. Once they make those advancements, I think you're defining new motion, right? So you can't just say, well, it has to come all the way back to this top. Sure, it could, but like you can't say that it definitely will. And then I feel like that's a really deep retracement at that point. It's more likely that it backs up to like this creek. If it's going to make a lower low, like something like this, makes more sense to me. If it's going to do kind of a weakness right here, like an SOW, it might go as low as, well, that would work if it makes a double hit there. But yeah, it may go as low as, like 32. That would be dumping back into this support, but then that's kind of the end of it. I don't know if I go any further than that. So it dumps through that support. Maybe it's going back towards this middle, since that might be another alternative goal right here. But that's a huge sell-off, you know? It's like a squeeze that then just dumps. I don't know. It seems odd to me. Well, then it just rockets to the moon. Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm just doing it again based on the measurements and the symmetry. I don't know how long that symmetry lasts, and I don't think it's very wise to assume it's going to be exactly the same. This could end up being like way up here, right? It's just a backup, you know. But there's certainly levels that could go. It could be coming all the way back down to here. So we'll have to keep that on the chart. But then that push up, that's sort of the end of it. Well, why not, if it backs up shallow, why not go way further? At this point, if it backs up to here, this is the 41 level. It's a support. It's an SOS potentially if it pushed over the top here. It's going to be really close because that's right on the button at the top. It's almost like a double top right there. This is another triangulation. So if this is distribution, it could easily stop at like 72 and then dump. Like we were kind of expecting something might happen there. The S curve looks super tight. It's like nice. I guess we just kind of have to leave it at that. Because this was the run up into 2020. This is starting to look just like what we did on the iteration one. It's just that this is a little choppy and a little different. It's not that different, but it's a little bit different. It's really similar. It's just a more defined motion. So we really don't know just yet, because we have to see this first backup, I think. That first backup goes really deep. I think there's more likely going to be some serious volatility up in here. That might be a signal of distributive action. If it doesn't go as deep, it could be a lot more accumulative later. See a little bit more strength into the top. We won't have the bigger backups till it's done. I see a strong sense of continuity with these parallels, though, these ones and these ones. Because if and when you develop this trend up, this creates the opportunity for like a hook type motion later going into February, which is exactly what we were afraid of when we looked at this thing. And that motion right there and where that might be. Timing here beyond February 2026, all timing here I think should be taken with a grain of salt. We did the best we could to maybe determine where that might be, but we're not there yet. I would want to see some more hits, but right now this is looking pretty convincing to me as a model for later. And I hate to say it, but it does seem like that's in the perfect spot right there. If you're going to sell down and come back up, just like we did here in this weirdness, and make a gigantic S-curve later, it's like right where it needs to be. It was kind of freaky now looking at it. We didn't have those parallels on the chart when we did this the other day, so yeah. But we do now, and they're all kind of in the right spot, which is good and bad. I don't know. Part of me is like, oh, it's fine. And the other part is like, head and shoulder, hook. It's already there. Like there's already a trend there, right where it should be. I didn't even see that a minute ago. I kind of like freaking out now about it. And that's the same marker. All right, so very good news if you're okay with trading long term. This is the second time that we found that from August through September, we're likely going to be up near 70s. So I know that's very backwards, and some folks think we're going to be low. I get that. But I'm not convinced we're going to do that move. I've said it before. I'm not convinced we're going to do that unless we drop like 26 or something. And if it depends on where it happens, the farther out we go, the less impactful that might be. We could drop down to 25 later, way later, and it could be fine. So there's a sense of like the question marks in my brain are like, when does it happen? Not does it happen by itself. If it dropped down to like 26 something here, I think it'd be okay for now by about mid-June. So if we do get some kind of nasty rug pull and we don't see upside immediately, it's okay. Alternatively here, we're going back to the micro now in GME. I'm not doing iteration stuff. I'm just doing wave stuff here. Alternatively, like this build out doesn't present much of a problem if it does break early. It's not that different. Because if you look at that wave, it takes time. And we mentioned this before that AMC and GME were sort of different in this regard because AMC may have the need to go down into a spring while this guy may just be crossing up and over during that time period from now until August. So while this has this kind of grandiose like chop up to the upside, ultimately AMC could be very, very different and be kind of nosediving. So it does lead to a lot of question marks maybe about the two interacting, but I don't think on the whole it makes a huge dent in what I'm trying to say. I don't make a big difference overall in what we're saying. So yeah, so that works, and so does the downside for AMC. And then what happens if this goes up? Because we were talking about if GME goes up, it could go to 45, but this suggests that you don't actually get there until July. So what does that look like? Probably looks like this. Just another S-curve like with chop. So you already have one, you'd have another one. Again, the potential there being that it could start lower, but you've got one S-curve already here. It's super low. I think you just do another one. I don't think it's that complicated. Should be two. There's always one in the beginning. There's actually probably more than one here, but you should have two. So yeah, in theory, that's it right there. It's not complicated. I keep saying not complicated. It really isn't. Because what would happen is that this would advance, and maybe it SOSs, maybe it doesn't right away. But you basically just have like an S-curve here, again, against this new resistance. So it's not very different from the expectation that it could still go up back towards 35 right now and have that pop. And that kind of makes sense, too, for other reasons, for AMC reasons. I think that could make some sense. Yeah, SOFs back up and go into the July 11th, and then you have a drop after July 11th. We have that drop here after the 11th. Right here, this is Friday. Right there. It's like kind of the D-Day for these. Then it starts downward motion into August. But the downward motion from July 11th into August for GME is probably more chill and like relaxed. And the motion for AMC is like not chill. So this is coming back to these creek bodies. This is coming down low. So then the other question is like, Well, yeah, but they have to both go up at the same time and down at the same time, right? They might, but they also have different severity. So like this coming back to check this creek is very different than for AMC to come back and check this creek. It's a very different story here, right? For AMC to come back down, that's go all back down to like 280. I mean, it's be really low. It'd be back here. So you're talking about very significant differences, 290s. Like in terms of where those creek bodies are. It's extremely different. So for this to have like kind of an extreme drop to the creek, it could go down to right here, which is what we were saying before, like 304. Actually, right where we said it was going to be. That's where the creek is. So I mean, like a 304 drop could happen, and that's like that S curve down, and that's the S curve here, and this doesn't go nearly that far. It goes to just 26. And then if it rallied going into, this is a bit different, rallied going into July, that doesn't really work for AMC, right? It's kind of like, well, that's way up here, Maybe it goes all the way to the moon, Booksy. Well, I don't want it to rally to 461 by then. But again, it's like the ideas of these kind of having similar movements doesn't necessarily mean they're going to both go in the exact same way, and they haven't. So that would be a silly thing to assume. AMC's clearly had more downward pressure during sell-offs, so those slides are really different. And remember the angle here? We talked about this a while back. The angle from here to here on AMC is down. From October through January, it's downward. But the angle on GME in that same exact bracket is upward. So there's this disconnect in directive. This is like an upward angle here, heading towards this top around 40. Whereas ours is on AMC is like a downward angle heading towards 3. Right. So the expectation would be this is actually lower in July, like down here at 335. Like this is the same target region. Whereas on GME, it's actually would be expected to be higher by July 11th. It's kind of strange right here. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's very much the case, like that there is a continuity there. Yeah, I think it was like October something or November 7th or something. I don't remember. It was a weird day. It was like November to January. So this is the directional movement for GME. And then AMC's is like downward. I think upside makes a little bit more sense here. If you had both, it'd have to be like a quick drop down into like the 17th or something. It's pretty similar. That's Monday the 16th. Could it still go from like here all the way up to 461? Well, never say never. The differences are pretty negligible. Like, either one could accomplish the same goal. It's just severity. There's a slight difference, but it's not much. It's like $1 of like where the middle is. It's really not much at all. So the question mark that I have, I guess, is if we think that's a likelihood, and I do think it's a likelihood. So one would be from here. Yeah, and then your middle is And again, we don't necessarily think it's going to go low again, but I guess if GME went down for like another spring and bounced, that's a middle of the road option where it does make a lower low and then go. That's what we're doing here. We're saying it could go down to like 28.70. I don't know where AMC would be. It'd have to just make like a higher, I think it'd have to make a higher low though. It'd be different than GME. Yeah. Made the dip. I don't know, it'd be tough. Maybe to this top, 319. I don't know what else it could go safely. Maybe. It'd have to be pretty darn similar is what I'm trying to say. To like where it already went. So I'm not seeing it. But we'll just use the current bottom and say, you know, I said I didn't think it should come down again, but a lot of it depends on what happens here. I think if it goes down before, it's fine. If it goes up into it, I don't think that's great. It'd be better to be down here already. That's a different story. Like it's already down here. That could be a bigger shallow S curve. I'm going to change that now. Where it's like a bigger version of this guy. But it can't just keep pushing up like it's going to go. So down is better right now for us if we want to have, if we need to make a lower low. Not sure if this lends itself to anything else in the future too. Because the other goal might be, since this made a higher low than this bottom, the other goal might be to create a new low here for some reason. For something else in the future. And again, I think that's just a parallel structure. Some kind of long-term move. I couldn't tell you what that is just yet. But I guess there'd be something accomplished if they dropped it low right there. It'd have to be. All right, we'll find out soon enough. So I'm changing my mind a little bit about AMC because I think depending on this, if this ends up being kind of this actual spring here and it goes lower, I wonder if AMC can make like a lower low here and generate like a bigger, still the same problem. You still have to come back above 354 and then 362. So that doesn't change anything. It's just a question mark in my brain. It's like this, right? It still has to come back above all the way up there. But it's possible. It's possible. And then this has a high mark at first. Probably of like third week in June or something. Just kind of slow. But that's the reality of it because you'd have to break this into two parts. So the first part would be here. And then there'd be like a second part here. Also divide it into quarters. That works. So there's still a good chance that we get a big pop next week. But then it could be a whole nother week of like another week. This is the next Wednesday before you get another one, which is slower than expected. So instead of saying you go up until that time, we definitely had some strong triangulation here. But this is kind of like way out here. I guess it doesn't really matter. There's another marker right there. That's a middle. That dotted line. That could be one. That's the following week. That's the following Tuesday. It's kind of different though. I think they'd be disproportional because if this one isn't going to go up high at first and it's going to continue, but AMC is going to go high and then drop, I actually think maybe AMC goes all the way up and does the SOS next Monday, like we were expecting. I shouldn't be using this. I should be keeping that where it is. But it would be like going up Monday or Tuesday after the earnings or whatever, and they'd be basically pumping it really far. And then you do consolidate for a time, but it consolidates on a top like an SOS would instead of, and then it does that. And the reason I think that is because I think that if that's where AMC is, this is going to accomplish the same kind of goal. If it's too low, then I don't think it's going to necessarily go above, make a new high at all. If it stops here and consolidates, I think it's dead. Because that's essentially what we had on the second side here. We just had it lower. Remember, we had it coming up and like dying here. You can make an argument that, well, it's going to be the same, but I think what you'd run into is that this taking a week kind of presents itself as, to get up to the top, presents itself certainly more as like a gigantic hook right here. And that's not really good. So that's not what you want. So that's a possibility. It's a more bearish possibility. So what you'd want to see is you'd want to see this like build up, hold above here, and basically go right up into the top. Timing here has always been speculative, and it could go faster, of course, could go a little slower, but this is pretty close to what I think I want to visualize. So yeah, so I think you have an issue of timing. If AMC does the same kind of advancement as GME, and then it's just going to be outside of its block. But that would be a good place, I guess, to sell it off, because then you'd have like basically downside here. GME would be going sideways for like almost 3 weeks, two weeks or so. 2 to 3 weeks. It'd be a good time for AMC to have like a crap out and come back down. I wish that didn't look so like possible. It looks very likely. Right, so this time period from around the 18th, what I'm suggesting is the time period from like the 18th of July, or excuse me, the 18th of June till about the 9th of July, maybe even going into that July 11th. It technically could be like last second, right? I think that whole time period is down and sideways. So down and sideways for GME may actually just be sideways, more sideways. But for AMC, it could be very, very brutal. So the 18th was another one that kept coming up last time. I did some measurements, but I don't think I ever really verbalized it. So I'm not going to pretend like I called that out. But I do think that was one that came up a lot a while back, which is curious because it is a Wednesday. So certainly this is a way you could get to 461. And if you wanted to get there. And then down and sideways until means a lot of different things, but June. May. Oh, it's already kind of where that creek is. I really hope this doesn't take that long to make a decision. I wonder if that's possible. In fact, there's actually not much difference between these two, because if you pay attention, the this is just a head and shoulder type breakdown, but on this particular marker, the white line right here. So really all I'm saying is that it's basically shouldering, but it's shouldering at a downward angle to put you beneath this white line, which is very typical. Like this is what happened in 2022 on AMC. So you had this shouldering motion that was, at first it looked kind of bullish, but then if you go back and you look at that setup, the angles were designed to kind of drive you back down after you were done. It's right here. So this is the angle right there that was later used on the shoulder. So this is a widening. You see how it goes up? It's like widening outward. And then later, this is the shoulder, right? We would say that looks like a head and shoulder, and probably because it is, right? In fact, it actually kept shouldering down, just like this was shouldering out, early on. And that's still a head and shoulder, even though it's messy. So I look at that and I'm like, well, if it's set up that way early on, and you've got that kind of weakness, you can play it out that way pretty easily. So if AMC were doing that, it would already have that shoulder line being kind of messed with and played out. That's actually what I'm suggesting right here is happening, because they already made that low. There's actually a second one that's extremely steep. And that was the one I was like, that one's like really low. That one's really low. But those are two markers that are kind of pushing down. So there's a potential there that it's already setting up low. But this would be much the same. It's just high. It's setting up high. And what it would have to be would be this guy. Like sort of like a retest of, to some degree, a breakdown here, and then I attempt to go back up. It's very different, but in some ways, but it's also not in other ways. So the shoulder would be somehow higher. I don't know where it would be exactly. This red line seems about right. So maybe this creates like a parallel. Perhaps it's using, I don't know. This top and then this support. Yeah, actually that's there. There's a wick here. Right. So ugly as that would be, it would be a possibility. So that's going back to recheck the creek and all that jazz. And it's got that rise on the shoulder line. Does this accomplish the same thing long term is the question. Probably. If it's set up higher, then GME has this big drawdown, huge drawdown from July 14th until August. It's essentially like a spring here. But I'd have to say that's much more bullish, you know, because it can't do this kind of a move and then I don't know, if it held that marker, it's kind of like, well, it busted through it last time. I don't know why it would hold it this time, but if it held it this time, it would be different. It may even have something very different, like this goes sideways and just literally be like an actual LPS. That'd be something else. Pretty big change of character, if you ask me. So at first the differences don't seem to matter that much. It's like, oh, it's a shoulder. So then it breaks down and goes down, right? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, this is a very steep one right here. So if we were using like angles to delineate how fast it goes, that could be a problem. That's like a 76-degree drop. It's really fast. Super fast. It's that direction. But it really doesn't make a lot of sense unless it breaks down. Head and shoulders are not guaranteed anything. So it still looks like the 2021 though. I mean, if you look at it, you can try to be more bullish about it, but it still looks exactly like this. Like it's basically the same functional thing. So I'd have to just kind of defer and say, yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it holds high or not. If it breaks any of those widenings, it's going to be potential for big sell down. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just not. Yeah, because this stayed pretty high too. In the end. But then it drops all the way back down through the bottom. So there'd be some kind of a rug pull in July. It'd be easier on our brains and our hearts and our heads if it went down low first. But this actually stays quite elevated. You can see this comes all the way back up to the previous top. And it did stay higher. So it didn't actually break all the way down. See the consolidation right here, it looks really similar to that motion. Very similar. So this rising shoulder, it could even hold even a bit higher, not get there, and still have a dump later. And everybody would assume that I was wrong, it's not going to go low, but probably still have a pretty massive drop. Yeah, see the bucket right there in the bucket? Look at that motion. Right here. What differentiates me from some other people is they're saying they think GME does the same thing. I don't think it does the same thing here. This bucket. That's the same motion overall. Maybe that's why this has taken so much longer than expected. Yeah, all we've really done is develop structure lines here, which is fine. Um, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make a big difference to me if it goes down or not. I guess if it makes a spring, it needs to make the spring, it makes a spring, so be it. I would prefer it if it's going to do that, it goes down first. So I'm going to say that. I think if it goes up first, we might be in a bit of a problem. We could have a deep dive. But I think if it goes down first, you probably get away with a one more marker here. I don't think it would kill it. I'm wondering if it did go down, if it just barely like dips beneath here. It goes like 325 or something, you know, and then just like takes off to the upside. Just staring at it a lot, I'm starting to see like why that would matter to kind of have that dip down and just kind of barely touch it and then go. Makes sense. It does. And then the rest of this, 5 minutes, I'm being done. All right, so I'm not changing my levels. Those levels are correct. But I am changing a little bit of maybe how it gets there. Just curious. I guess I don't really care where this happens, as long as it happens. Considering this could take a while to get to the top, it could be like the 17th. Then this might be just a catalyst for that move. It may not even start until there, you know. But the rest of it's pretty much as it should be. So I think that's probable. And all I'm really doing is shifting it from this one to this one, which I know frustrates folks, but hey, I've got them. I can use them. And I'm thinking based on what I'm seeing on GME that might make more sense timing-wise. Yeah, spring. Oh, it comes right over both of those lines too. Right where it needs to. It's right where it needs to be. It takes off to the upside. This is just like a truncated version of it. And then potentially goes low. I think this one may end up staying up quite high. So what I don't have here is I don't really have any chop. I'm just kind of showing you lines. But this would probably be sideways and then probably have some additional chop on this side like that. Wouldn't be like, that's probably what it would look like. And I'm not doing that just because of this. It really would be like a sell down here. They'd have distribution time at the top. You'd spend some time there. Maybe a little more than we did here. And then slide down and fail here to make it looks similar, like it's going to do the same thing, but it would fail to advance. And that's probably not going to happen until July 11th. And I guess, my guess is that there's some other trend being broken, but I can't see it just yet. Maybe this one. This is the one that cuts through everything right now. It's curious. But yeah, perhaps that one. This guy. That's the end of it, I think. clean this up a bit. I don't know about this guy coming low, but we'll wait it out. We'll see what happens. That's still relevant. I'm just getting rid of ones that are not actually there. Actually, that already did puncture it, didn't it? Totally did. It already popped through there. Now, it could do it again. And still, this could still be a shallow S curve. I don't know about making a lower low, but it could probably come down that low again. Be okay. If the price is going to sell off again, I'm saying. What can't happen is you can't stay elevated here and like have like a hook unless you make that advancement. That's the distribution model. It's like where you stay up and then you're pumping into a fake top. That would be different than going low early. So going down into Monday or something wouldn't be bad. Coming up above and making a higher high than 362 wouldn't be bad. But staying kind of in the middle and like chopping right here and staying elevated, I think that's a fake out. I think it's going to be a bearish action then, rug pull on that earnings. But the rest of this looks pretty straightforward. I'm going to have to sort of readjust positions, I think, myself. Timing is a little bit different here. So you might be thinking, well, man, you were hedging a while back. How are those doing? They're not doing well. But the thing is I bought them for like way out. And now I'm like thinking I might even push them a little further towards August. I had them out in like mid-July, but I don't think that's far enough. You know, I said that I think at the time I wasn't sure that was going to be far enough because this to me looked like it could have been, again, it's the same concept here, like that we're talking about there. It's like kind of the exact same concept. This looks like it could have been the top that leads to like a downfall. This direction, you know, if it stopped early. And it's the same thing, it's just lower and to the side. You see that? But otherwise, it's essentially identical. But if we do go up again, and it looks like GME wants to do that in that way, I think that everything else here is the right idea. It's just that it's happening higher. And unfortunately, this kind of reminded me that there's totally a possibility it still slides all the way through here. All the way back down to the floor. See, and this is like the middle back there, back then. This, on this particular time in 2020, if you go back and you look at that, this area ends up being kind of the middle, the chop right here, which is at 344. Which is low enough. It does take you back down. If we go all the way to that marker right there at 335, which is probably a stronger, or 333. This is what we were talking about before. Remember we did 331? It's in the right spot. It takes you to a spring. So conceptually, even though this is super ugly, this is actually the same. It's the same thing conceptually. It would be brutal as all get out, but yeah, it'd be really ugly. But you could go all the way down here too. Same motion. Whew, man, that would be one heck of a drop. All right. I think that's done. Yeah. Same thing. Here, either way. All right, so maybe some good news, maybe some bad news. Good news is we found a lot of these targets are pretty consistent. We found a lot of really consistent parallel structures that kind of reinforced later time frame targets. Bad news might be that we do need to see another low. I don't know for sure. But also, kind of bad news is that we may not just. I don't think we're going to go into a full sprint up to 40. I think we're going to take a little longer than expected. And we'll probably have some chop in the middle. So there's going to be an extended period of time, I think, if this happens. We may not see it until that 11th date, which is kind of strange, but it is what it is. I hope I'm not like completely backwards about it, because there is another setup. I just don't want to deal with it right now, which is that you come up here and you do kind of the downside first, in which case this stuff's all shifted. You build back out going up, which is kind of what happened here. It went really low and then it built back out slowly. So that would be like, we don't do this. Instead, we go really low here and then build out. And it would be a different setup because you wouldn't hit that top till way, way later. I don't know. That one's not my favorite. I don't want to go into any more detail than that other than to say, yeah, I guess if it broke down here and we hadn't already made this move, I think it could be that's where we make that move. But we'd have to see it fail. It's the same place you'd always fail, right in the middle of the S-curve. You have the M top and you either drop or you go up. So short term, pretty decent chance this is going to hit 35 again in the near future. Longer term, I think you got more question marks, unfortunately, about how that goes. Yeah, NU's got a nice wick on that bottom. That looks good. Fang's kind of trying to build support. Not sure about that. Still looks like it could have downside. I don't really want to talk about Wolf today. MVW climbing a little bit. It's kind of as low as I thought it would go. And if it's going to have this LPS, I think it just holds here and starts going. But it'll take some time to work out. AMD never made another high. It's not in a position where it has to hold up a certain level. It's just kind of in the middle. I definitely could see it having some, potential for downside still. I don't really see any problem with that, and it wouldn't hurt it. Tesla was one that I kind of FOMO'd into yesterday on this bottom, and it doesn't look like it's going to pay off very well because previously they've had 12 to 24 hour 10% hikes when it drops that quickly and that rapidly, but it's just not recovering. Would be right after lunch. If it doesn't have a big pop, I think it's probably not going to go anywhere till next week, and it may take a couple days, but I do genuinely think that it's probable that it comes all the way back up to 327, and that's about as far as I take it for now. Maybe 332, but that gap. But I think it's very likely. There's several strong reasons why that might happen, and it's built for that kind of recovery right now, should it make some certain supports. Apple looked pretty bad. I just took a glance at it a minute ago. Starbucks looking really good. I had those 95 calls. Surprisingly, they're not doing super hot, so I'm a little nervous. I'm going to have to double check this because I'm wondering if there's a big pullback inbound. I don't know. They should be flying off the shelves because it's at hit 90 or something, got close to it. It's like, man, I got them way back here, but they're just not. So I don't know. It makes me a bit nervous when I see stuff like that. Yeah, and then Apple's kind of a mixed bag. I don't know. It did a backup. Like I was saying earlier, it looked like it was trying to go and it wicked. So it just looks kind of ugly to me. I could see it coming all the way down to 198 next week. If it holds right now and advanced, I would change my mind. Like right where it's at right now. If it held and broke out and went back above and somehow like closed today above like 205 or 2 something, I mean, maybe. But it just feels really wishy-washy right now. This is a mess. It's more distributive looking than accumulative looking right at the moment. It's this volatility and volume is bizarre. So I'm going to say I'm leaning towards that downward motion. Yeah. But anyways, that's it for me today. My kiddo was asking for help. I need to answer that call, so I'm going to go help him out. You guys have a great weekend, and I will talk to you all on Monday.